It's good to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back to Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I take my first pass at the commander in front of us on a budget on my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. That deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. So I'd really appreciate it if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider checking all those links in the description. I'd appreciate it. But today, we're starting our last week of content before we get into the new Spider-Man set. And so we're just hitting some random stuff. And today we're talking about Aesi, Tyrant of Gyre, Strait. A 6-mana Simic commander. It says we can play an additional land on each of our turns. And whenever we play a land in under our control, we get to draw a card. Aesi's a really interesting commander for a lot of ways. It's a classic landfall idea for a commander. You want to play lands, want to play as many lands as we can per turn, we want to get value. But Aesi's payoff is drawing you cards, and there's a lot of things in these two colors that we can use to pay off drawing cards. So Aesi's going to put your classic landfall matters type stuff together with some draw types matter stuff and try to create a great strategy as we try to get both, see as much of it as we can. But I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in seeing all of our videos just a little bit early for just $1 a month, consider checking that out down below. Landfall's a pretty wide category, and there's a lot of ways we could look at it. I think we want to play a mix of some old and some new. Avengers Zendikar is a classic landfall engine. Whenever it comes in, you make a plant for each land you control, and then whenever a land comes in, you put a counter on each plant. Good way to build a board and make it bigger. Bristly build, which can kind of come with a hefty price tag, just is going to put out counters every time a land comes in, and then you could pay mana to double all the counters on all your creatures. It's one of those things where the earlier in the game you see it, the better you're going to be able to pass out those counters. Famished Worldsire is a big 8-mana creature, but when it comes in, you can devour any number of lands, and then you look at the X card of your library where X is its power and put a number of lands from among them on the battlefield tapped. So it's Devour Land 3, so you're going to get 3 counters for each one land that you sacrifice, and potentially could let you really dig deep in your deck, put a bunch of lands in at once, and trigger a bunch of landfall abilities at the same time. Glacier Godma gives all your creatures +1/+1 in vigilance and haste until whenever a land comes in. This, I think, is relevant because haste, I think, adds a really interesting piece here, right? You are going to see a lot of landfall effects that add counters or do other things, but the fact that this gives out haste, I think it makes it interesting with things like Scoot Swarm and these landfall payoffs that make tokens, because then those tokens could get involved that turn and can really turn your 3 or 4 land drop turn in some real value. Might Farm Harmonizer doubles the power of target creature you control at a turn whenever a land comes in. This could definitely make some things a threat, right? Especially our creatures that have trample, making them an even bigger threat for our opponents. Mossborn Hydra comes in with a counter and doubles the number of counter on it every time a land comes in, turning into a very, very huge threat very quickly. Bailiffs and Scoot Swarm, again, both landfall payoffs that make you tokens whenever lands come in. Scoot Swarm has the caveat that once you hit 6 lands, you just make copies of Scoot Swarm instead, really just exponentially driving up the number of tokens you're making. Royal Elemental can let you steal creatures for as long as you control it, which is pretty fun, taking our opponent's key things. Tadiova, more ways to draw cards that gain life. Tyler's Provisioner can make us either a food or a treasure token when our lands come in. And then we're trying out that Chocobo Racetrack from Final Fantasy, mainly because the birds that you make will get a buff that turn for each land you control that enters, meaning they get a nice buff, and on future turns, right, they could potentially be bigger and better when it comes to attacking. I think Tadio is a really obvious comparison for Aesi on who you like better as a commander. And, Tadiova gives you the life gain in the card draw, whereas Aesi gives you, right, the ability to play another land and card draw. So it's kind of, dealer's choice on which you prefer. Kazandu and Ride the Shupuf both putting counters on creatures when lands come in. Retreat your Coilhelm can tap or untap creatures and scry 1. Again, just some effects that happen when our landfall comes in. But I think where the deck's going to shine is trying to play more than just 2 lands per turn, right? By 2 lands, I mean our land for turn and then the land for turn that Aesi gives you, right? Ideally, you want to be hitting multiple per turn. And we have cards that do that. Things like Azusa or Oracle Moldiah let you play extra lands on your turn, and that's great, right? In a sense, playing 4 or 5 lands on your turn is ideal, but we're not always going to have 5 lands to play. So the question is how do we do this? And we want to target effects that can let us bounce lands back to our hand or replay again for value. Something like Moloku, the Clouded Mirror, says that we could pay 1 and return a land we control back to our hand to make an illusion. Well, that puts a land back in our hand, but we could play again, trigger our landfall triggers again, and then bounce it back with Moloku's ability if we want to again keep playing those lands over and over again. We have ramp cards like, Interest Restoration, Harrow, Roiling Regrowth, sack a land, go get 2, bring them in. That gives you 2 land drop triggers right when they come in and does ramp you that little bit. Exploration, just like Azusa and Oracle Moldiah, letting you play an additional land. But then, Trade Routes and Oboro, again, more ways to bring a land back to our hand so that we can replay it again and allow us to, continue those triggers. And you can look at these multi-drams and multi-drop lands in multiple ways. You can look at it as a great way to draw off of Aesi, or you could look at it as a way to really proc these landfall triggers multiple times per turn. And then what landfall triggers you choose, right, is really going to shape the experience you have with the landfall side of your deck. But we can't just have a deck full of landfall triggers. Like, we need other things to help us make this function. You have things like Ancient Greenwarden that's going to double up each landfall trigger when they come in. Bonnie Paul comes in and makes a big token named Bow that's power tough is equal to the number of lands you control. Whenever you attack, you could draw, put a land in. Jor-El, to start a combat on your turn, makes a land into a big bird where X is the number of cards in your hand. Again, great for Aesi, right? Since we're trying to draw all these cards, could potentially make these huge birds that can hit and deal damage to people. Traveling Chocobo, just like Green Warden, doubles up on those landfall triggers and lets you play lands on the top of your library. Blackblade Reforged buffs a creature for each land you control. Again, great when you go on something like a trampling creature, right? Because then you can really give them a huge buff. And then Staff of Titania gives a creature a buff for each forest we control, but makes Forest Dryad land creature tokens whenever it attacks. We do have ways in the deck to make all of our lands forests, so it can really help with Staff of Titania. But at minimum, that creature's attacking, giving you another landfall trigger and giving it another buff on its way to try to hopefully, hurt your opponents. And then we kind of cycle our way back towards paying off drawing matters. There's a group of creatures that have a type line that say whenever you draw or have an ability line that says whenever you draw your second card each turn, do something. And those are the kind of abilities we want to see. Alondra, Jor-El making tokens. Now, Alondra is a very interesting one in that when you draw your 5th card in a turn, she gives herself and Drake's a bunch of buff for X number of cards in your hand. That's great on a turn where you could play multiple of these lands, right? Draw multiple cards and go off. If you could do it multiple turns, right? If we have one of those setups where we're bouncing a Boro or something like that back of our hand and replaying it, we might really be able to draw 5-6 cards in a turn and get that buff. Now, Jor-El, we could pay 6 mana and give all of our creatures base power and have this XX, where X is number of cards in our hand. The more cards in our hand, right, the better that effect's going to become. All of our 1/1s turn into 8/8, 9/9s, right, and dealing big damage to our opponents. Teferi can make those 2/2 spirits that grow whenever you draw a card. It also grows whenever you draw a card, and it can allow you to draw more cards. So those spirits can become big threats as well. Min's another example of that whenever you draw a second card. And then, use things like Decanter and Thought Vessel to just give yourself no maximum hand size. We have multiple of these effects in our deck so that if we could get access to them, then we're no longer worried about how many cards we're drawing. We could just have a huge hand, right, and take advantage of all those effects. Same thing with like Wizard's Class and Reliquary Tower, right? Giving us that no maximum hand size. Now, Wizard Class, if you get up to level 3, is actually going to help us by putting counters on creatures whenever we draw cards. A really nice ability to add on to maybe some of those counters on landfall triggers that we have to just really grow our creatures. And then Ominous Seas, whenever you draw a card, put a Force Shadow counter on it, and then you can remove 8 counters from it to get a nice big 8/8 Kraken that hopefully can help buff up our board. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. This is my first pass at Aesi. And going into testing, I did notice when I was looking around EDHREC and some other people's lists that because Aesi is a Serpent, there's that sea monsters type ability you can use when it comes to your creatures to take advantage. We have a couple like newer sea creatures that have land-based abilities. We saw things like Famished Worldsire. You have like Grappling Kraken from Foundations. You could pay off a little more into that. Comas, both the Comas are nice threats for what they are. Big bodies that have some way to protect themselves and could really take over a game. And then you have something like Serpent of the Yawning Depths that could just make AC unblockable, meaning that you could use something like that Might Form Harmonizer or other ways to just grow AC with counters to make AC into a threat. I didn't choose to pump as much into these type of things, but they're there, and I think they're great options for you if you choose to spin your deck that way into trying to make those an option. There are also just some other great, sea monsters that are higher up in mana, but it shouldn't be an issue, right? Because we're a landfall deck that's going to hopefully draw that many things. I like this one. We've got a 3-lander with Thought Vessel, so there's our no maximum hand size. You've got Farseek for a little bit of ramp, Shapoo for the buff, and then Jor-El for that draw, take advantage. So we've got a good start, right? We're starting to see things we want to see, right? The pieces that we're looking for each time. Here for the Thought Vessel. Oh, I can't Jor-El plus Farseek, can I? Yeah, I think we're just going to have to Farseek, right? Because it does come in tapped. So I think we're just going to have to Farseek, guaranteeing we're getting closer to something like Nissa next turn. If we want to get, starting to get closer to something like that. This is a very effective card, doubling up the mana our forest tap for, and we can untap them. The only problem, of course, is we can't play. We can pay the double green. Yeah, we can get Jor-El in, right? Ticker up to untip the Anglet. 3 counters on it. Now it gets to tap for 2 green, and we get Jor-El in, and now we should be able to get in. Right, we should be able to get in Aesi this turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the reason I want to do that before I play my lands is because then I can take advantage of Aesi's ability. So on land coming in, Aesi's ability is going to draw us a card. That's going to make us that cat token from Jor-El. Then we'll do the Broker's Hideout, drawing us a card off of Aesi and immediately sacrifices. We're going to go get a forest off of it. That comes in, draws us a card, right? So unfortunately, we only get to benefit from Jor-El's once, but you could start to see where now we're getting some nice, card draw. And that's all the mana we have to spend, unfortunately, because although we did play the forest on the island untap, that forest did come in tap. But remember that we can still tick Nissa up this turn to untap that forest, right? So now we're starting to see some value there, and we'll probably go for something like Ominous Seas, right? Start taking advantage of us drawing the cards. So in the next turn, right, we draw a card. Obviously, Yevimaya is great because it turns everything into a forest. So now all of our lands are going to tap for double with Nissa. That draws us a card, right? Makes us a cat. And this is the thing that works really well with Nissa and Stepha Titania, right? Getting that forest matters, type stuff there. I think Ride the Shapoof would be good to start putting counters out. Korahum's good if we want to start doing that. I think I like the Shapoof to start putting counters in. That was our first land for the turn, so we do have another, so we'll play it. Draw off Aesi, put another counter on that. We'll put the counter on Aesi there. Woman Wave's interesting. Could bounce a bunch of creatures back if your opponent's board gets too bogged down. Otherwise, I think I like, get something like Korahum. We could just go for something like Rolling Regrowth, sack one of these islands, get a couple forests off of it. It can get a couple more draws, draw a little bit more. Because the thought process there is, yes, you're ramping, but basically, right, if you think about it, you're getting these draw triggers off of Aesi, right, to dig through your deck, right, as you're getting these things out. With the counters there. Those do come in tapped. I would think we'd have enough for Garrix to draw. Again, we're just trying to get as much as we can in this turn. I think we already got our cat this turn. Nissa can untap one of these forests. putting some counters on it. You could start to see some value being given there by untapping our forest. But I think ideally, like, you want to keep trying to get more of these tokens out, especially with Jor-El, right? So that you use Jor-El's bottom ability, right? Because you come to our turn, Terramorphic Expanse is great with Aesi because that draws you a card, makes you another cat. You could sack it, right? Which is still only, right, one land drop for us. It comes in, draws us a card. Right, you could get the counters off the seas for a token, but now, you tap 3 of these. Now they're 8/8s. If we go a little bit deeper, play another land, draw a card off Nissa, right? Now they're at 9/9s. We get to add a couple counters. Now you're turning them into everything into base 9/9s. Now these cats are bigger. These lands become 12/12s, and you can start to see where Jor-El, right, really fits into our game plan as far as taking everything we have access to and making it better. Playtest number 2 here. We're keeping a 3-lander with Arcane Signets. We have 4 mana, but we have some couple interesting pieces. We have Arachnoseas, comes in with a couple slumber counters on it. Whenever you cast a spell, you remove a counter from it. It can tap for mana, and then it becomes a big 12/12. And Awaken the Woods, just making X 4-red Dryad land creature tokens, could be a bunch of landfall triggers at once, right? As you put out a bunch of value. My thought here is shifting Woodland into Arcane Signet, and then Island into Arachnoseas. Again, Arachnoseas comes in tapped, but again, the point is now you're really ramping up your mana. We've run out of mana, so to speak, but we still have room that we can set up. So we could just go for Aesi this turn if we want to, set up a big Awaken the Woods turn next turn. Or, we could go, my thought is something like Jor-El plus the Harmonizer. This comes down 2 counters. And now, this turn we could go for Aesi if we want to. Again, another counter down there. Play a land, draw a card, make that cat, right? And then, play another land, draw a card. We could double Jorah's ability. We could double whoever's ability we want with the Harmonizer. Again, the Aesi can't attack this turn because it just came in. But the point is, now we're drawing cards, right, as we're getting these lands in. And we can hold up that rapid. The point is, now we have enough mana we can start looking at a huge Awaken the Woods to draw a ton of cards, right? Worldsire could be pretty fun. Just taking our whole board out, just going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's going like 15 deep on the Worldsire and just trying to hit ourselves a bunch of lands. If we want to do that, that would mean more card draw. It would mean more doubling with the Harmonizer, and could lead to some big damage with Aesi depending on how that works. There's a cheeky play where you could do that, and then if you had enough mana, like Whelming Wave everything except the Aesi, which is just huge, right, and hits in for some big damage. Like, think about a world where Arachnoseas isn't have a slumbering counter on it, where it's a creature. You could double it in Aesi and then just Whelming Wave everything away, and now you have these 2 huge attackers that could knock somebody out. And I mean, we could set that up, right? It doesn't have to just happen, this turn, right? Like, my thought is Forest, draw the card, make the cat. But for that plan, you'd ideally want Arachnoseas, right, to be off of its cooldown, and note that, or not off of its slumber counters, and note that the mana from the Worldsire, or the lands from the Worldsire, do come in tapped. So, like, if we tap all our mana to do the Worldsire, right, we wouldn't have mana left over to play anything else. So I think we have to kind of be smart about if we're going to do that. We also have something like Overwhelming Stampede, which means as soon as Arachnoseas comes off of its slumbering island, now you're getting +12 there. So I kind of like the idea of Teferi. Comes in, turns off Arachnoseas. We have 2 mana because we're going to use, basically we're going to use non-mana from it, not its mana to cast our things, make that spirit. Then I'd say just we could use Arachnoseas for the 4, but I don't know if it really matters because all you're doing is doubling, 1 creature's power this turn. I kind of like just holding up Rapid Hybrid, and then just, you could go for the Overwhelming Stampede, giving them all +12. You get 0 to fairy to draw a card, get that cat. Again, but the point is, I think you could just Overwhelming Stampede. You have that line. You could go into the World Sire this turn. And, again, sack them all, draw them all, put them in, get a bunch of the triggers, really grow things. I think there's a lot of ways to look at it, but I like the Stampede just because then you're giving them all trample, which is going to guarantee more damage, right? Effectively, Recipes doubles to 24. Everything is up in the 16 to 17 range, and you're trampling for big damage. And whoever you don't finish off this turn, we could just look into trying to finish off next turn. Playtest number 3 here. We're keeping a 5-lander with Mossborn Hydra and then Bonnie Paul. So again, something like Mossborn Hydra really wants to take advantage of our land drops, so we obviously don't want to use something like Terramorphic Expanse, right, until Bonnie Paul's, right, already in. Canter plus this. Ooh, Shia is a great draw. Shia is turning all of our creatures into lands, non-token creatures into lands, giving us more landfall drops. This go up to 4. Aesi. Terramorphic Expands, draw off of Aesi. Cat off of that. This goes up to 8. Sack the Expanse for a forest. This goes up to 16. Draw another card. And then, you have Soaring for next turn. But now this is a nice attack. Again, we're starting to really see the advantage between Jor-El and Aesi. Get Soaring in. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 mana. Aesi could come in and get that, but it almost makes sense to put a Shia down first. Then you're getting more, right? Because if Shia comes in, this is considered a land. So you draw. You make a cat. Now you've got a 32 power Mossborn Hydra. And then I've got what? 3 mana left? I mean, you could Rolling Regrowth, take out one of the islands, really just get in on, Mossborn's power this turn, 64, 128. Probably going to really knock one person out. I guess we get to play another land, don't we? Because we only played one land, right? Either way, I think we're in a good spot because the Shia makes all of our non-token creatures into land. So any non-creature, any non-token creature we play is going to be a land drop. So, AOZ and Avenger of Zendikar gets so much better next turn. So does Bonnie Paul, right? These things just become better plays. And if our opponents get rid of the Mossborn, hey, no big deal, because we could follow them up with things like Bonnie Paul and Avenger of Zendikar. They're just going to put more factors in. Then, as we play these multiple drops per turn, we're drawing cards, and that, that vulnerability of Jor-El, right, comes into effect. It becomes more and more of a threat. Let's get into our last playtest here. 3-lander with the Decanter. Again, no maximum hand size. We see Rolling Regrowth. There's the Scoot Swarm. And then Ice Till. Whenever you play a land, mill a card, you can play lands from your graveyard, play an additional land. So a good way to get some more lands in. I think it's just get into Decanter on 3. The question is, what do you do on 4? Do you get like Ice Till in and try to double land? Just to try to work your way up to Aesi, but that feels kind of off to me. I almost feel like I'd rather Scoot Swarm, play the land, get the insect, right? Work my way up that way. Then as you come to the next turn, get the insect, Aesi, play the 6th land, get a Scoot Swarm, draw, right? So now we're starting to get some value into the lands, and we have the Scoot Swarm starting to pop off, right? And then on our next turn, you could go Ice Till if you want to start getting an extra land drop. I mean, Rampaging Bailiffs is going to go up the same line as Scoot Swarm, right? Making you the tokens when your lands come in. So, Basin, 2 Scooties in that beast. Draw card, right? Field Passage, 4 Scooties, the beast, draw a card. You could crack the field passage. What, 3 plus the 4th mana from that? Don't hate the idea of the wizard class. We're like 1, I think, mana relevantly off of Chocobo Racetrack to again get that set up. Same thing with like Moloku. You could get something like Ice Tilling for next turn. We could just like try to Roiling Regrowth on somebody else's turn to make a bunch of Scoots Worms and whatever, and just go from there. Just think about it. Roiling Regrowth, you sack 1, you get 2. That's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 16 School Core and copies. That's 2 more beasts. And then we could come back to our turn with all of that and just take a big swing. There's so many ways you can look at these land drops. And that's why I think it's important to have these like instant speed ways to pay 1, land for 2. Aesi could let you draw on somebody else's turn. You could get triggers there. And then next turn we could get into Moloku, bouncing lands back to our hand, replaying them, getting the tokens, getting the value, and just going off. But I'd love to know, what do you think of Aesi down in the comment section below? Really interesting commander. I think this, like I said, this and Tadiova play in a very similar space. I'd love to know if you have either deck, what you think of this one, and I will catch you on the next one.